program says 9 o'clock sharp, and my phone just turned to 9 o'clock. Happy first Sunday. Well, I know we had church last week at 10, but first adult forum, happy summer. So nice to see how so many of you out here bright and early. I know one of the reasons you're out here is because of our superstar speaker today. I told you I was going to pump you up. I don't need to introduce Steve, Director of Religious Studies at Rhodes. No, Professor of Religious Studies at Rhodes, our Theologian-in-Residence, and Director of our Liberal Arts and Prison Program at Rhodes. He's going to give us an update today on his book that he published. When did you publish it?
2021.
2021. He's done a lot of work and a lot of visiting around the country, talking with other churches. He's going to kind of give us an update of what he's learned, and I hope extend an invitation to our church to step even more into this type of work. Before we begin, let's bow our heads in prayer. Lord, thank you for this beautiful, sunny first Sunday of Adult Forum Day, for all the souls that have come here to listen, to ask questions, to learn. We know that you are with us throughout the next hour, inviting us to question, to reflect, and to grow. We thank you for that. Amen.
Do I need to use the mic? If I don't, I'm not going to, so if you can hear me. That's it. Okay, great. It's great to see so many people here. It's great to see so many familiar faces. I'm a little nervous, actually. I usually don't get nervous, but I don't know what I was expecting. Maybe half a dozen people or something. Glad you're here. So I'm going to talk about my most recent, perhaps my last book. I think if you ask the least, you'd probably vote for that designation. It's called Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA Meeting and Other Questions Christians Ask About Recovery. I remember when I was trying to get my friend at Erdman's Press to publish this, I had another title at first, something about recovery in the church, and then I came up with this title, which I thought would be better. He said, I don't think we can use this title because I don't think anybody will know what it means. I said, oh, trust me. So I sent him a list of articles with exactly the same title that have been written the last few years, which I'll show you in a minute. He was like, oh, okay. So this was an odd book for me to write, though. If you know anything about academic publishing, typically people don't write about their own lives. It's not something we're trained to do very well. So I had to sort of, to the extent that this is a kind of a quasi-memoir, and in other words, it tracks my own experience in the book, I had to sort of retrain myself. In fact, at one point, I was hearing voices of professors past and mentors telling me I shouldn't do this, and so I started writing down their quotes and putting it on my phone, and where I'd start every morning, I'd look at them and go, okay, put that away. There were things like, what are you doing? You're going to throw away your credibility, your life's not that interesting. There were about half a dozen of them, but I eventually got over it. So it's much different than anything else I've ever done. I had some trepidation about that, but I also knew that it would speak to those people who didn't need the title explained to them, that they would kind of latch onto it and probably get in touch with me. That's exactly what's happened. I don't know how well it's sold, but I occasionally will get emails from people going, thank you for your book, I've often had this question, here's my experience and so forth. So this is a truncated version of my recovery story, and it interacts a little bit with Elisa's recovery story. The fact that she's here makes me a little nervous, but I did check us out there last night. She's okay. So it starts in 2008 when Elise went to a place called the Meadows in Arizona, which is a very nice, well-manicured, very professionally maintained treatment center. And one of the things that if you have any experience with inpatient treatment, one of the features of it since the 70s is family programs. Of course, treatment for alcoholism and other addictions has been around, the sort of modern treatment model since the 1950s. In the 1970s, they started to figure out that if you don't treat the family, you really don't treat the disease. And so the Meadows has and had a family program that was very well developed. This is not what it feels like to be part of their family program. So this is how it's advertised. It's a kumbaya moment. Everybody's together, and what I remember is, and the Meadows does it really intensely. It was a week long, 6 days, 8 to 5, and they had all the family members in a particular sort of apartment building that they owned off campus. At the end of the day, you'd see the cars pull up and the people get out and kind of walk like this to the rooms that we've been beaten up. The reason we were there is we were going to help our poor loved one who was suffering from addiction or trauma or whatever it is. What we realized was that this family week was largely about us, about the role that we played in our family and we put the cycles and our own issues. And so I came back with a very different view of what my role was going to be in the recovery of our family. And so I had to find some place that would help me do that. Who knew that it was within, if those trees weren't there, you could see it from here, a place called the Experiential Healing Center, which I'd never heard of, but was literally, if you have a really good arm, within stone's throw of where we're standing. It's on Lockett Place. It sort of backs up to the center right here. A friend of mine suggested that maybe this was a place that I could find somebody who would really understand what I was looking for. And I remember going to see, this is kind of where we were, at least me at this moment. We weren't that young, but at any rate, these are the people that work across the street. Experiential Healing Center, Kent Fisher being sort of the main guy. I remember meeting with Kent for the first time and explaining to him that I really wanted to help my wife. And he said, oh, okay, interesting. And what the bubble above his head said was, I've seen people like you before who are helpers, but really have your own issues, so looking forward to dive in. They do something over there that they branded as SOMEX, and some of you have perhaps experienced this directly, or maybe you're familiar with it, a somatic experiential intervention to treat trauma and addiction. Somatic experiential means it deals a lot with your body, how your body stores trauma, how that trauma can be reprocessed through sculpts or psychodrama. It's hard to really explain what all this stuff is. It's just sort of tell you.
When the AC's on, would you use the microphone? The AC makes it hard sometimes to hear, particularly in the back. Thank you. Sorry.
Good morning, I'm Steve. Hi, Steve. Which part of what I just said I need to repeat, but I don't think I'm going to repeat any of it. So this sort of modality was very strange for me. One of the things that I often got asked was, how do you feel? Which I didn't really know. And even more difficult was, where do you feel that in your body? Which is a question nobody had ever asked me. And I had no idea how to answer. You know, I'm a long distance runner. We don't feel things in our body. We sort of repress that stuff. And so this was the kind of thing I had gotten into. It was really different for me as a left brain person to really think about like what I'd experienced in my life, how it was stored, how my memories and traumatic experiences were stored and so forth. The person who was really the sort of character behind all this was a woman, Sharon Wig-Schreiber-Cruz, who had trained them, Michelle and Kent. And she was the one, I didn't know this at the time, she was the one who sort of had formalized and written about the role that families play in addictive systems. And so they were sort of perfectly trained and prepared to deal with me and us and our family. And so we actually, when Elise got back, we started seeing them. I think she started seeing Michelle, as a personal therapist, I saw Kent and we saw Kent together, so they knew all our shit. And so it became clear that we were in a good place. And at one point, we were sort of despairing of putting all the toothpaste back into our lives. And they made a suggestion. It was stronger than a suggestion. It was like, if you want to fix this, you need to do this. And it was that we find a place called Recovering Couples Anonymous, which has a meeting in, I didn't know at the time that they had started it, but it has a chapter in Memphis. And it is got a lot of tools for couples in various stages of crisis. And so we were headed to Oxford for this summer. This was 2009 now, and couldn't really take advantage. We did some stuff online, but when we came back, we started going, and we've been going off and on for 15 years now. And I'd say it's the one thing, if I had to point to one thing that's sort of brought our family back together and given us the hope and the sort of recovery that we enjoy now, it's Recovering Couples Anonymous. So I want to say a little bit more about it. So as it turns out, it's not a very common thing. There are not many. I think Memphis has the only meeting of RCA between Atlanta and St. Louis, Atlanta and Dallas, and it's pretty sparse. People come from all over the region to go there. It meets at Saturdays at 5 p.m., which at the time I thought was crazy. This was football season. It was before the advent of the DVR. It seemed like a terrible time to have a meeting, but I decided that it's probably not worth skipping it for. So we started to go, and it was the first 12-step meeting that I had ever attended. I think Elise had some experience starting at the Meadows, but what I didn't realize at the time is that it's fashioned after AA. Basically, it's the readings and the steps and everything are revised, adapted version of AA stuff. And so this is what, when you walk in, if you were to walk in an RCA meeting, this is the first thing you'd hear read. Ours is a fellowship of recovering couples. We suffer from many addictions and dysfunctions, and we share our experience, strength, and hope with each other that we may solve our common problems and help other recovering couples restore their relationships. By the way, there are a few shibboleths or sort of distinctive phrases that people in recovery use, and you can always tell if somebody uses the words experience, strength, and hope in that order. They're in recovery. It's a little code, so now you know. Let's see. So the only requirement for membership is the desire to remain committed to each other and develop new intimacy. So just as in AA, the only requirement for membership is a desire to stop drinking, even if it's for just that day. The only requirement is that you remain committed to the relationship. So our primary purpose is to stay committed in loving and intimate relationships and help other couples achieve freedom from dysfunctional relationships. It's not easy when you walk in. Typically, there's, as we say in the fellowship, people come in because their collective ass is on fire. Something has happened. Something has gone down that threatens to break up the marriage. And usually, there's one person who's the identified patient or the identified, violator, and then the other person the identified victim, and you usually tell who that is by their body posture as they walk in. Right? The person who doesn't really want to be there, doesn't think they need to be there, has their arms folded, they're kind of slumped back, and the other person sort of has that 30-yard stare. So people come in, it's difficult, they wonder if they usually they're there because their therapist said go, and they said they would. It takes a while to really feel comfortable. How it works. So again, I didn't know at the time, this is basically a revision of the AA section of how it works in the AA Big Book. The main thing that's required is rigorous honesty. And so that sort of puts everybody on the same level, right? If you can be honest, you might get through this. Our stories disclose in a general way what we used to be like, what happened, what we're like now. So I don't remember distinctly our first meeting. Typically, people in their first meeting will identify as newcomers, and if you do, then the whole meeting becomes about you. It becomes about them, addressed to you. People tell their stories, what it used to be like, what happened, what it's like now. And that was revelatory for me because I thought we were the only people in Memphis certainly who had experienced the things we had experienced, were facing the things we were facing. Turns out a whole lot of people had very similar stories and seemed to have survived long enough to at least start going to RCA and be in rooms together. And so that was really inspiring. It felt hopeful, and that was something I really need. Remember that we deal with addictions, cunning, baffling, and powerful. It's another shibboleth. If you ever hear somebody say that addiction is cunning, baffling, and powerful, perk up. They're in recovery. That's a language from the A, big book. We also deal with memories of past hurts, misbehavior, and vows violated. There's one who has all power, that one is God, may you find God now. Really struck me how much God there is in 12-step recovery. In fact, in the original 12 steps, alcohol is mentioned twice, God's mentioned 6 times. I think that's about the right ratio. AA is not about alcohol, it's about how to find a way of life which does not require alcohol. And that is a spiritual solution that is based on a spiritual awakening when you find God or re-find God. So that was really a change for me. I hadn't really ever been in a 12-step meeting inside, seen it from the inside. It looks very different. It's not about the problems that bring people in, it's about the solution, the spiritual solution we're all seeking. So here are the steps we took. So if you're familiar with the 12 steps, these will be really familiar. If you're not, these are the 12 steps of RCA. They're a little bit revised. So for instance, step 1, we admitted we were powerless over alcohol is the way AA reads. That our relationship, that our lives together had become unmanageable. Certainly felt true for us, felt qualified. We came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to, in the original AA 12 steps, insanity, in this case to commitment and intimacy. We made a decision to turn our wills and our life together over to the care of God as we understood God, 3rd step. 4th, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of our relationship together as a couple. I'm going through these quickly, trust me, you don't go through them quickly. Step 4 in particular is a whopper, and it deals with resentments, it deals with taking account of your part in the resentments that you have, which is a real kicker. When you realize that the resentments you have, before you move on, you've got to assess how you contributed to the situation. Anyway, I'm going to keep going quick, as if you went through them quickly. So step 5, we admitted to God, to each other, and to another couple the exact nature of our wrongs. By the way, so you probably have heard of sponsorship, 12-step fellowships. You get a sponsor, somebody who helps you through the program. In RCA, it's a sponsor couple. And so it's a little different, say more about that. We're entirely ready to have God remove all these defects of character, communication, caring. Humbly ask God to remove our shortcomings. Made a list of all persons we had harmed and became willing to make amends to them all. Make direct amends to such people wherever possible, except when to do so would harm them or others. This is an important caveat. Then the last 3, we continued to take personal inventory, and when we were wrong, promptly admitted it to our partner and to others we had harmed. Typically, step 10 is something people take every night before they go to bed. It's just sort of a sort of check-in of responsibility. We sought through our common prayer and meditation to improve our conscious contact with God as we understood God, praying only for knowledge of God's will for us and the power to carry that out. Step 11 is a big part of the steps, and there are whole organizations dedicated to helping people exercise step 11 on a continuous basis. And then step 12, having had a spiritual awakening as a result of these steps, we tried to carry this message to other couples. The original step 12 says other alcoholics, and practice these principles in all aspects of our lives, our relationship, and families. So 2 things about step 12 that are really important, I think, this idea of spiritual awakening, and it applies to everybody, whether you're in a church, outside of church, feel like you have a relationship with God or don't. There's a sense in which this is a reset button in your life. Whatever theology you have, PhD in my case, it hasn't helped you be the sober person you want to be. So maybe you want to think differently about how you're going to do the God stuff from that point on. This idea of carrying the message and practicing these principles in all aspects of our lives. If there's one thing I've learned about
recovery that really it took me a while to kind of get is this idea of a way of life. And the AA Big Book, Bill W. talks consistently about this is a way of life. This isn't a place you go. This isn't a sort of value take. It's a way of life that affects all of your life. So the readings in RCA continue. The point is that we were willing to grow together along spiritual lines. So it's progress, not perfection. Spiritual progress rather than spiritual perfection. This is really important. And then this reading ends with 3 statements. Our relationship had become unmanageable. Despite our best efforts, we were headed for separation and divorce. I think we felt that way. Probably no human power could have restored us to commitment and intimacy. I think we definitely felt that way. And that God could and would have gotten our side. And I think we still, despite the spiritual difficulties that had sort of arisen in our lives, we still felt confident that the answer was going to involve God. We weren't sure exactly what that looked like, but I was relieved to know that this was a spiritual process, spiritual program, and that I thought it might work given that. The moment in meetings, and I think this happened like right from the beginning, when I was really became convinced that this was the place for us, was with the reading of the promises. This comes at the end of all 12-step meetings, some version of the promises. It's still hard for me to read through them without getting emotional, so I'll just let you read through it as you can here. But the promises are sort of the promise of like what the results are going to be if you stick with this program. And when you're in a situation like we were, they sound really good. They sound like hope. We're going to know a new freedom and a new happiness. We'll learn to play and have fun together. As we experience mutual forgiveness, we will not regret the past nor wish to shut the door on it. Trust in each other will return. And then it just goes on and describes these promises of self-pity disappearing. Our whole attitude and outlook on life will change. That sounds like a really, really big promise, but I can tell you that it's true, and if people stick with the program, I really believe this, and I say this to newcomers, if you stick with the program, the promises will come true. I don't know how long it will take, but it will happen. We will suddenly realize that God is doing for us what we cannot do for ourselves. Another AA shibboleth, if you ever heard anybody say that, they got it from the AA Big Book. It's a giveaway. God was doing for me what I couldn't do for myself. You ever hear anybody say that? So, now the book. So why did I decide to write a book about recovery, particularly with the name, Why Can't Church Be More Like an AA Meeting? Well, basically because Saturday nights were so powerful for me, and then Sunday mornings were Sunday mornings. And so the first chapter in the book is titled, Why Can't Sunday Be More Like Saturday? And typically, so this was 2009 and following, we were very religious about going. We went every Saturday night. We had a standing babysitter for Braden. He remembers this because I was talking about it recently. He knew Saturday night at 4:30, Saturday afternoon. Maddie was coming over. That was what was happening. I'll see this later on. And this is what it felt like. This is not a picture from RCA, but this is kind of what it felt like. People really together, on the same page, holding hands. We actually did hold hands at the end of the meeting. And then I'd come to Idlewild. And let me just say, and I say this everywhere I do this presentation, I love Idlewild. It's a great church. If I didn't, I wouldn't still be here. But this is what it felt like on Sunday mornings after RCA. And, it wasn't that I was bored. I just felt separated from people. I felt like I was dressed really nicely. I was not dressed that nicely, but imagine me dressed really nicely and just feeling alone and unable to really share what was going on with me and my family at the time. And it wasn't anything about you, it was about what church is and what we've come to see church as representing. And so it just struck me that because these things were so close in time, just how different they felt. What was I going to do about it? What did people do about this? Because by this time I knew I wasn't the only one. What did people do? Did they stop going to church? Did they find a different church? And I did enough research by this time I knew that there really wasn't a different kind of church that would kind of be like the picture on the top. So it's really a conundrum for me. So I got interested in this question, and this was 2015 now. I got an email from somebody forwarded to me. I don't remember who it was. It said, look, there's this organization called the National Association for Christian Recovery, and they're having a weekend-long retreat in the Hill Country, Texas in March. This was 2015. So I had a spring break, and so I got a friend of mine named Oscar to go with me. We drove to Hill Country, Texas. I don't recommend that. It's a really, really long way for the weekend. But it was called Spirituality and Recovery, and I remember going in and not really knowing what to expect, but having that sensation when I walked in, I have found my tribe. Have you ever had that feeling? Like, these people get me? So they were pastors, seminary professors, people with various relationships to the church who had gotten into recovery and didn't feel like they could really live out their life in recovery in the church, and so they started an organization in the 80s that met. And from the moment, like the first meeting, I was like, yes, these are my people, and I've gotten very close to some of them. I started researching. I started the idea of maybe writing something about this, maybe writing a book. And this is the book that came out. This second chapter is called "What Can the Church Learn from AA?" And it turns out this is not a question that I've been the first to ask. It goes back at least to 1949. A guy wrote, pastoral care author, wrote an article called "Alcoholics Anonymous Speaks to the Church." There was another famous article in 1955, and then I put some of the ones more recently. These from 2000 to 2007, 2017, sort of when I stopped doing this research. Here's a smattering of articles one finds online by church growth experts, people who are pastors, asking the same question. And so when my editor said, I don't think anybody's going to know what the book means, what the title means, I said, yes, they will. I pointed this out to them. So this is a common question that people have. And the other thing I started doing is looking for stories of people who, professional Christians, we'll call them, who get in recovery and what happens to them. And it turns out I found 6 memoirs of people like this. One of them was somebody I knew because he's very big in the evangelical world. Jim Miller wrote a book called A Hunger for Healing, a book called Samson and the Pirate Monks by a pastor named Nate Larkin, Shane Moore, a guy named T.C. Ryan. The subtitle says A Pastor's Journey Through Sex Addiction. A book called Sober Mercies, How Love Caught Up with a Christian Drunk. Thirst, God and the Alcoholic Experience by James Nelson. And Seeds of Grace, Reflections on the Spirituality of AA by Sister Molly Monahan. So these are pastors. In the case of Heather Koch, she is a Christian author. James Nelson is a seminary professor. Molly Monahan is a nun. So these are all people who would qualify as professional Christians. They all have this sort of crash and burn experience where they, something happened, they realize they can't control their own lives, they're unmanageable, they're powerless over an addiction, and so they write about it. And what was remarkable to me was the commonalities in their experience and how they describe it. So for instance, when they're talking about what's missing from church, so they're describing now their experience in a recovery community of some description, and now they're trying to assess what it is that's missing from church that they really find healing in their 12-step community. Right at the top of the list is a place where people present themselves in brokenness. And if you think about it, you walk into a 12-step meeting, it's an admission that things aren't going great, right? Or as we say sometimes, you're not on a winning streak. If you're walking in there, if you're willing to be recognized as somebody who's got a problem they can't handle. So that's one of the first things they mentioned, that people present themselves in their brokenness as opposed to people in church. Whether we're broken or not, you would never know by looking at us or by talking to us, for that matter. People are seeking transformation. They're not there because it's the thing they do on Sunday morning or because the people they're going to see or so that the kids will get up and go. It's for transformation. People find acceptance and belonging. There's a sense in which people find whatever takes them in there, they find a kind of openness and an extension of care and from the other people there that's really striking. They thrive in informality. So the two things that are probably most characteristic of 12-step meetings that one doesn't find so much in church are laughter and profanity. I would argue they're both really important part of 12-step meetings. And certainly the laughter part is contagious, but the profanity can be very funny as well. And I think it reflects a sense, a sort of common sense of like, this is how crazy I was. This is what addictive thinking looks like and sounds like, and everybody recognizes it, yeah, of course. So this informality and the fact that nobody's really in charge, so whoever's leading the meeting is just the person who got there last, or the person who signed up, or maybe the person who just felt led to lead that day. There are no real leaders. And then the idea of pursuing progress rather than perfection. This is another shibboleth of AA, right? It's progress, not perfection. We're not perfect. There are going to be slips. Recovery is messy. Christians, church people don't like messy so much. And so this can be a disconnect. So this is what I say in the book. It's weird to quote yourself, but I'm going to do it. It's my presentation. So anyway, I didn't think I could say any better than this. These recovery memoirs share a narrative arc in which Christians who struggle with addiction or dysfunction find in 12-step fellowships a sort of spiritual kindergarten, to use the phrase coined by AA co-founder Bill W. It is certainly counterintuitive to think that people with advanced degrees and extensive religious training need to begin anew their process of spiritual formation. But the memoir suggests that this is often what is required. For these professional Christians, the lessons taught in recovery spiritual kindergarten include surprise, insight, and transformation. I'll say a little bit more about each of these. So there's a real humility to this process for these people, right? Especially somebody who's a nun, who's spent her sister Monahan, who spent her life, studying, contemplating, devoting herself to God, and walking into the 12-step meeting and realizing she might have something to learn from these people on the spiritual side. So the surprise is, first of all, the 12-step fellowships are teeming with Christians. And so this is true. You wouldn't maybe expect that, but yeah, people who can't get what they need in their church, or who don't want to come out to their fellow church members, will be there. Christian faith can present obstacles to recovery. For instance, a sense of spiritual superiority. I tell this story all the time. I'll just go ahead and tell it again. It's probably going to come out sometime today. A good friend who's a pastor in Houston who drank his way through seminary, basically realized he was an alcoholic. Kind of when he was into his ministry, decided to get recovery, and decided to get a sponsor who was unlike him. This is typically what people do, right? Somebody who's really going to challenge him. So he got a biker to be his sponsor. Turned out to be a good decision. He was struggling staying sober, and he met with his sponsor, and his biker's sitting there. I imagine the biker's leather tats and stuff, but his sponsor says to him, your problem is you've really never done a good second step. So just to remind you, the second step is came to believe that a power greater than ourselves could restore us to sanity. And my friend, pastor, says, dude, I've got a freaking PhD in the second step. He says, yeah, I know that's your problem. So this idea of superiority, right, can die hard. Also, suspicion toward the disease concept of addiction, right? A lot of Christians, whether they're conservative or liberal, have this sense that their addiction reflects a moral shortcoming on their part, something they could fix if they worked hard enough. So the idea of it being a disease sometimes is off-putting. Spiritual fruits of recovery have eluded them in the church, and this makes them angry. And almost all of these people say at some point, why is it that things that I found in these rooms were not available to me in the church buildings, the church pulpits, the church, potlucks, the church meetings that I've been in for the last few decades. So some of the insights they gain, recovery cannot begin until one hits bottom. The missionary impulse is misguided. Some of these people go in there and say, I'm going to tell them about Jesus in this place. Don't ever do that at a 12-step meeting. There may be people in there who love Jesus, but that's not your role. To sort of, you're there to listen. Their conception of God is part of the problem. That is the Christian going in, right? That they have a conception of God that's judgmental, that's sort of version projection of their father or something like that. And that's part of the reason they're having trouble being sober. And then transformation. So this is the way I describe it in the book. These Christian authors speak of the recovery in terms of transformation that is both gradual and hard-won, for it requires nothing less than ceding control of one's life to God, fearlessly identifying character defects, reassessing priorities and values, restoring broken relationships, and choosing a life of humility and service. This transformation is often accompanied by a recognition of the difference between belief and experience, between statements of faith and vital religion. You may remember step 3, decided to turn our wills and our lives over to God and understood God. It's very different than believing something, or affirming something, or confessing something, or going somewhere. To actually turn your will and your life over to the care of God is a spiritual movement that a lot of people think is easy, but is not so easy. So, where does all this bring me? It brings me to identify something called the recovery ethos. And I wanted to put it on one slide, so I wrote it down in 6 parts. The first is authenticity. People are present in their brokenness. The second is seriousness and purpose. People are in search of transformation. The third is acceptance. People find belonging and connection. Fourth is non-judgmentalism, no self-righteousness, no shaming, and no crosstalk. And by the way, if you ever heard the term crosstalk, it's very important in 12-step meetings, right? You do not give advice to people. You do not respond to someone's share by saying, oh, well, maybe you want to try this. That's called crosstalk, and you'd be surprised by how free it is to know that you can share whatever you're going to share, and nobody's going to say, oh yeah, my brother-in-law had that problem, this is what he did, right? It's just people are going to say, thank you, keep coming back. And so it opens up a space for honesty. Informality, no dress code, no hierarchy. Leaders understood as servants. This is really important. So to be a leader is to bring the coffee, or to collect the money to pay the rent, or to order the literature. Maybe on this particular day it means leading the meeting, but that's all it means. It doesn't mean, just because you have 30 years sobriety doesn't mean you may be looked on as a model for people, but it doesn't mean you get a t-shirt or something that represents that. And then messiness. So, the idea of sober addicts is really interesting. It took me a while to grasp this. So the idea of AA is that if you're an alcoholic, you're either a sober alcoholic or you're an unsober alcoholic, but you're never not an alcoholic. So the question is, the best you could hope for is to be a sober alcoholic, a sober addict. So it really changes the atmosphere when you assume that everybody in the room, no matter how much sobriety they have, no matter how well they work the steps, they're still a broken person with this disease, basically, which was not their fault, but of course they're taking responsibility for the consequences of that disease. And so this, I think, there's a theological parallel to this, the idea of righteous and redeemed, right? That we're sinful, no matter how good we look on the outside, we're still sinful human beings who are trying to live a redeemed life. Progress, not perfection. So why can't the church be more like AA? That is kind of the promise of the book. So here's why. This is, again, my attempt to get it all on one slide. Six reasons that I kind of identify in the book. The link between church and respectability. All right? To be a member of a church, to go to church, is really a way of saying, I'm a respectable person. If you don't believe me, just ask me. Intellectual sophistication. So one of the things about 12-step recovery that's so interesting is that it looks at the outside, it's like it's so simple. Like, let go and let God. What are some other sort of mottos that we have that sound really simple?
Keep it simple.
Keep it simple, yeah.
The serenity prayer.
The serenity prayer. So like, we're all really smart, we all went to college, we got degrees, we're not going to be taken in by something as simple that you can get onto a bumper sticker, right? But it's really the simplicity that's where the power is, and this idea of, going back to spiritual kindergarten kind of gets at that. Personal struggle is viewed as incompatible with piety. I think one of the reasons, I'll just speak for myself, why I couldn't talk openly about what was going on in our family is I felt like it was incompatible with my role, my persona as a person of faith, as a leader in the church, as a pious person. I didn't want anybody to know that stuff. And that's part of the church ethos, right? Fear of surrender and powerlessness. So a lot of people, they get to the first step and they take a step back because the idea of being powerless feels very humiliating and very disempowering. But if you were actually at that stage of being powerless or recognizing powerlessness, it feels really good, but not until spiritual pride. I've already told the story, I usually tell this story, but you get it, right? I got the God stuff. So let's go from step 1 to step 4, because I'm going to skip the 2 God steps. Yeah, that's always a problem because, as someone will say to you, look, you've done a lot in the church, you've done really good things. Clearly it hasn't kept you sober, so maybe we want to go back and look at the second step a little bit and see what might be there for you. And then I'm fine. We do this really well. How are you? I'm fine. Fine. Fine? Good. We're fine. Hey, sorry, we're fine. So I talk about step 0 in the book. For Christians, step 0 is I'm not fine. So until we get to step 0, we're not going to get to step 1, right? Until you can say I'm not fine, you're not going to be able to say your powerlessness over this or that. So you can see the problems. Well, I can do that. Okay. If you're a certain age, you remember Barbie, the church lady. So what it adds up to is churchiness. Church's failure to resemble 12-step fellowships is in part a paradoxical result of their success in shaping believers who are respectable, smart, and pious, who desire to be seen as respectable, smart, and pious, and who are encouraged to present themselves this way by other Christians pretending that they too are respectable, smart, and pious. This ethos, which might as well be called churchiness, creates natural limits to congregation's capacity for grace and recovery. So the question that was always in the back of my mind as I wrote this book was, what are the implications of this for Idlewild, for a place like Idlewild? So I traveled around the country until COVID, so between like 2015 and 2020, looking at different models for doing church-based recovery ministry. And I'll show you in a minute some of the things I found. Some of them were close to home, some of them were far away, some of them were very focused on the concept of recovery, some of them less so. But typically, when I do this lecture, I just did it in Hawaii a couple of weeks ago. I know, right? I did it in Hawaii. And they always ask me, so how is your church implemented these things? And I said, well, we haven't really done it. And I haven't really figured out what it looks like in our place. And I would have said a few years ago that we had an NA meeting that met on Tuesday nights, but I don't think that NA meeting meets here anymore because I couldn't find it online. So at this point, there's nothing that would identify us as a recovery-friendly church, except maybe the fact that the guy who's the Theologian-in-Residence wrote a book about it, but that doesn't go very far. So it's still very much a question for me, like, what are the models that we might emulate, and what would those look like? And I'm going to go over to my computer and skip to the later part of the lecture, but if you have any questions, this would be a good time.
I have a question.
Yep.
Slide before this, I think, why isn't the church more like it? Almost every one of those, when you think about what is preached and what we say, we believe they're all there. Humility, submission to God, so why don't those line up is the question, which I'm sure is just a question you're asking.
Are you suggesting there's a gap between what we say and what we do?
That's your book. But it's amazing how those points just line up with what we are already saying.
Yeah, so you're exactly right. And one of the interesting things is about, you think about confession. Like, we do confession every week.
Yeah. And
But it's rote and it's
well,
not personalized.
It is, though, to me, a lot of those are beautifully written, and they seem very real to me. They don't seem like theological language. They seem like everyday things, but the way we do it is rote. That's true.
Private. It's very private. Let me use that word
Yes.
instead. Because they are very powerful sometimes. They are beautifully written often, but they're very private. They do not require us to suspend the I'm fine banner that we have around ourselves. Yeah.
In your own mind, you can. I think maybe I'm just trying to send out a little dart of hope that we have the words anyway. That's a good start.
How does this butt up against the confidentiality aspects of recovery communities?
Yeah, it's a really interesting thing. So it used to be people took it much more seriously.
The confidentiality?
Anonymity, yeah. But even in early AA, anonymity wasn't so much, it was partly about don't tell people you
Is
saw.
it anonymity or is it confidentiality, or are they both?
It's anonymity.
Okay.
Confidentiality is another thing, and it's also
Okay.
important. It's probably more important than anonymity at this point. But anonymity wasn't, it was partly about don't tell people you saw me here, but it was also about humility. It's the reason that I'm Steve H, not Steve Haynes, because it's possible somebody might know my name or associate my name with my family, and it would lead to a kind of imbalance of power that is incompatible with sobriety. That's really what anonymity means, right? The reason you don't know the last names of a lot of people you're in meetings with is because you might think something about them.
It levels the play.
Levels the playing field. Yeah, so there's this egalitarianism. But it's true, don't out me, but I might out myself. And
That's on you,
it's
though.
generational. A lot of young people are very open about it, much more than the early days were. Yeah.
Are you familiar with Celebrate Recovery?
Oh, yeah.
What's that?
That's something that I feel like would be easy for Idlewild.
I've got a whole chapter in the book on Celebrate Recovery. Don't have time to talk about it today. It's a really interesting phenomenon because it's so ubiquitous. They advertise like 35,000 chapters worldwide. And it's probably the most successful church growth movement of the last 50 years. I don't have time to talk about it today, unfortunately. But it's,
Can you sum it up in a sentence, kind of what it is, so we know?
Okay, so here's my little typology of the way churches, Christians in general, approach 12-step recovery. So there are people who reject it, people who embrace it. So the rejectors say the messages are incompatible. We can't bring that into our church. It doesn't fit. Embracers say bring it on. It's the same message. If you were familiar with Richard Rohr, he has a book called Breathing Underwater, which this is basically his refrain, that it's the same message as the gospel, just in different language. And then there's adapters. And adaptation can not only be understood in terms of rejection and embrace, but also along this sort of horizontal axis. Their idea is that the message must be adapted, but there are different kinds of adapters. I won't tell you how long it took me to get this slide done, but I hope you're impressed. So on one end, it's let's make AA more like church. Okay, so this is not what I'm shooting for in my book, but this is kind of the way to do it. And on the other end, let's make church more like AA. So Celebrate Recovery, in my view, is an attempt to make AA more like church, to take some of the things that AA does well and churchify them or put them within a church environment. So there's no profanity. We have the proper kind of hierarchical leadership. Only people who are trained can lead. So I went to a Celebrate Recovery summit at Saddleback. So I was like at Mecca for Celebrate Recovery. So I really tried to study the DNA of this movement. It does a lot of things well. I'll just say one of the things it does it terrifically well. When you introduce yourself in Celebrate Recovery, it's I'm Steve, a believer who struggles with X. And to the extent that Celebrate Recovery has led to a re-envisioning of how people identify themselves, how they introduce themselves, that's a powerful thing. But it also takes some of the rough, messy edges off of AA in order to make it fit in a church environment. So that's kind of my assumption. So how are Christians reclaiming what the church gave AA? Well, I talk about dozens of them, but let me mention a couple that are kind of close by. One is Hope Church.
actually Hope Presbyterian Church, but as a lot of churches have done recently, take the denominational affiliation out of the title. On their website, you read about all these support groups they have, including sexuality support groups. And not only that, if you go there on a Sunday night, there's somebody there to meet you and make sure you get to the right meeting. They meet simultaneously on the same hallway. So this is one model of doing recovery ministry that utilizes 12-step meetings, makes them part of the mission of the church. It's not just we're renting space to these people, this is part of our mission. So another one even closer by is Grace St. Luke's Episcopal Church. They have what's called the Wellness and Recovery Sunday. Actually, I spoke at the Episcopal Recovery Ministries of the Episcopal Church National Conference last May, and there were a lot of complaints about the fact that Recovery Sunday had become Wellness and Recovery Sunday. And you see the difference between those two things, right? Recovery suggests there's something wrong with me. Wellness suggests I want to be the best person I can be, right? So they're not quite compatible, but the wellness and recovery is now the way it's described.